Imagine going to buy your next set of tires, and the tire store tells you they don't make that tire anymore. And the government tells you you have no other tire options. Then what do? You can't buy new tires, so do you have to buy a new car? This sounds like a dystopian novel, but California is trying to make this law real right now. While most Americans are worried about inflation, rising repair costs, insurance and gasoline costs, and whether they can even afford their next vehicle, bureaucrats in Sacramento are debating whether you're choosing the wrong tires. And if you think that's another California story, think again. That's the mistake people always make. For years, I've watched California regulators create policies that eventually spread far beyond state lines. And automakers don't build one vehicle for California, another for New York, then another for Massachusetts, and one for New Jersey and Connecticut, and so on. They can't avoid that. And California is simply too large a market to ignore. And when Sacramento moves, the rest of the industry often moves with it. That's why this story matters, because California isn't trying to regulate some obscure automotive component most people never think about. They're talking about the only thing that touches the road, your tires. And the more I dug into this proposal, the more questions kept popping up. Why this? Why now? Why is the replacement tire market and your choices that has functioned for decades suddenly being treated like a problem that requires government intervention? Who asked for this and who benefits from it? And perhaps most importantly, who pays for it? But before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe and click that bell for notifications. There's a lot more coming on this and you don't want to miss it. I can tell you who usually ends up paying whenever regulators decide consumers need fewer choices. You, the consumer, every single time. That's when I started digging. And what I found surprised me. This isn't some last-minute proposal somebody dreamed up over coffee. The authority behind this regulation goes all the way back to 2003, 23 years ago. Let that sink in for a minute. A law passed when flip phones were still popular is suddenly being used to shape what replacement tires Americans may be able to buy in the future. That law is California Assembly Bill 844. The regulation is being handled through an administrative state agency, the California Energy Commission, or the CEC, rather than a voting floor in the state legislature. The process works on a timeline of public hearings, data collection, and comment reviews, keeping this under the radar and could pass with no notice. This way, it stays out of the public eye. Public comments just closed on June 12, 2026, and nobody heard about it. And members of the California State Legislature, specifically Assemblywoman Lori Wilson and Senator David Cortez, sent an official letter to Governor Gavin Newsom expressing serious concerns. The public found out their plan, and now they're forced to backpedal temporarily. The CEC is currently evaluating the massive volume of pushback from the tire industry, consumer advocacy groups, and state politicians before they can publish a finalized rule. Now's your chance to speak up, because if you don't, it'll pass during the night, and you'll never hear about it until it's in place. The program is built on a delayed two-phase rollout. Phase 1, January 1st, 2028, banning the sale of the lowest performing, less efficient replacement tires. Is this winter tires, off-road tires, performance tires? Interesting. Who makes the decision what's efficient and what's not? Phase 2, January 1st, 2031, the much stricter, highly controversial efficiency targets would take effect, forcing the vast majority of standard street tires to match factory efficiency metrics, all on the guise of fuel-efficient tires. This is total BS, and we all know it. The proposed regulation works as a point-of-sale ban, so the entire legal burden and any financial penalties fall squarely on the businesses selling the tires, not the drivers buying them, which means everything's going to cost more. The only tires you'll be able to buy are the exact same spec as the ones that originally came on your car when it was delivered. What happens if you have an older car, maybe something from the 90s? What's the likeliness of that tire even being available? Probably not. There's probably a replacement tire. So I guess it just screws drivers all the way across the country. It will become illegal for tire retailers, mechanics, dealerships, and online distributors, including places like Tire Rack, to sell or offer for sale any replacement tire that doesn't meet the state's strict efficiency database criteria. Yes, there's a loophole because it is a state sales restriction and not a vehicle registration law, at least not yet. There is nothing legally stopping a Californian from driving over the border to Nevada or Arizona, buying whatever sticky performance tire or heavy-duty off-road tire they want, having them mounted there, and driving back. California is aware of this, but they may try to stop this option too. The key to passing this regulation is that most drivers have never heard of it. California regulators thought they succeeded. Since the original law was passed in 2003, it gave California regulators the authority to create what's now called the Replacement Tire Efficiency Program in secrecy. Today, it's moving through quickly, so you want to write this down. California Energy Commission Docket 26-TIRE, Tire-01. That's California Energy Commission Docket 26-Tire-01. Because if you care about this issue, don't take my word for it. Go look at the receipts yourself. The workshop and the studies are there. The economic analysis and proposed language is there. And the public comments, they're closed. And that's where the real story lives. Not in the headlines, not in social media, in the actual docket. And that's where my eyebrows really went up. For more than 20 years, this authority sat quietly in the background. Then suddenly, it's a priority. Suddenly, we're told consumers need help buying replacement tires. Suddenly, regulators are worried about rolling resistance and deciding the tire market needs fixing? Sure, if you believe that, I'll sell you the Brooklyn Bridge. It's on sale this week. Whenever something sits dormant for 2 decades and suddenly becomes urgent, I start asking questions. A lot of questions. Because things like this don't happen in a vacuum. Someone's pushing, someone's advocating, and definitely someone benefits. And somebody's making a lot of money. And when billions of dollars are involved, this is where you must follow the money. Which brings us to the replacement tire market itself, because we're not talking about a niche industry. We're talking about one of the largest segments in the entire automotive aftermarket. Tens of billions of dollars change hands every year. Hundreds of millions of replacement tires are sold. Independent tire shops and repair shops depend on it. Major manufacturers depend on it too. And you, the consumer, depend on it as well. There is a lot of money changing hands, and whenever there's that much money on the table, I start looking for fingerprints, not conspiracy theories. Who is showing up at these meetings, and who's filing comments? Who's influencing the process, and who is lobbying regulators? And who stands to gain market share if the consumer choices become more limited and you have no options? I did find an official statement that there is no evidence of major tire manufacturers like Michelin, Goodyear, and Bridgestone funding a lobbyist to push this regulation. In fact, major players like Goodyear have joined SEMA, the Specialty Equipment Market Association, in urging California to halt the rulemaking. When it comes to who is funding this, there isn't one single boogeyman tire company writing the checks. Instead, the situation is a mess of competing industry interests and environmental lobbyists. The big 3 tire makers, Michelin, Bridgestone, and Goodyear, are not publicly funding the bill to hurt you, but they are in a unique position to benefit from it. And these massive companies already have billion-dollar labs and advanced chemical patents like green silica components needed to make high-efficiency tires. Small budget tire brands from overseas often lack this technology. By supporting strict efficiency standards, the big 3 tire makers effectively use the law to force cheaper competitors out of the California market, leaving you with only more expensive high-tech options. Maybe this is a way to get rid of those pesky competitors, the little brands like Nexen and others. Don't compete with them, just push them out of the market entirely. Who's pushing back on this regulation? TIA, the Tire Industry Association, which represents tire retailers and your local tire shop. They are the loudest opponents because they know this bill will make tires 20 to 50% more expensive for their customers, and it kills their sales of performance tires and off-road tires. SEMA represents the automotive enthusiast community, and they are lobbying heavily to protect performance and specialty tires from being banned, arguing that a guy with a weekend Mustang shouldn't be forced to buy efficiency tires unless he wants to. You certainly can't put those on the track. And those are questions consumers should be asking, because here's what nobody seems eager to discuss. The entire proposal is built around fundamental assumptions that simply aren't true. The assumption is that the tire originally installed on your vehicle represents some kind of ideal benchmark. I've spent decades around vehicle manufacturers, and that's not how tire selection works. It's not even close. The tire that came on your new vehicle is not what is the best and most efficient option. It didn't win because it was the greatest tire ever built. It won because it satisfied a business case. Automakers and tire manufacturers negotiate these contracts years before the vehicle reaches production. The car brands decide on which tire based on price, volume, supplier relationships, manufacturing capacity, ride quality, road noise targets, and fuel economy. and everything gets negotiated. Some things get compromised. The winning tire isn't necessarily the best tire, it's the tire that won the negotiation and got the deal. And now California wants to regulate that negotiated tire that they got a great deal on because they made some sort of agreement that you must have that tire on your car. And if not, you can't drive it. That's a problem. Think about that. The replacement market exists because consumers want alternatives to the compromises manufacturers made. And everyone chooses a favorite brand of tire based on what they want, what they're doing with it. Now regulators are talking about turning those compromises into a standard. And that's where the story starts getting very interesting. Let's take a look at an example of something outside the industry. We've all heard of Sweet and Low, those little pink packets that you see when you go to get coffee. Well, at one point, somebody wanted to come into the marketplace. How do you beat the leader? Very simple. They created a study that they funded, and it was for equal, and they said that Sweet and Low causes cancer. People freaked out. What other options do I have? Well, there's Equal. Well, that kind of looked funky. So they created another competing brand that they also owned called Splenda. So that company owns both Equal and Splenda, and they went head to head against Sweet and Low, which put them in a negative position. And for years, they tried to recuperate their losses because somebody made a study that someone paid for. This happens all the time in a lot of different industries. And that's why you really need to keep your eyes on what's going on, because we're starting to see this happen when it comes to tires and your choices. The more I dug into California's tire proposal, the less it looked like a tire story. And that's usually when I know I found the real story. Because whenever government starts talking about helping consumers, I always ask the same question. How much is this going to cost consumers? How much is it going to cost you? Nobody in Sacramento is talking much about that part. They're talking about efficiency and energy savings, and they're talking about long-term benefits. What they're not talking about is what happens when choices start disappearing. And that's where things start getting interesting. Let's start with the reality regulators seem to be overlooking. Consumers don't all drive the same vehicle. They don't live in the same climate, have the same budget, or the same priorities. A driver in Southern California has a completely different driving needs than a driver in Buffalo, New York, because this is a national story, not a state story. And that's why I really want to bring this to your attention. A family hauling kids to soccer practice has different priorities than someone driving a Corvette on weekends. A contractor towing equipment has different needs than someone commuting to work in a hybrid. That's why the replacement tire market became such a massive industry in the first place. Consumers want options. The factory tire wasn't always the best answer. Sometimes the factory tire wore out too quickly, or it was too expensive. Sometimes it wasn't available anymore, which happens a lot. And sometimes it wasn't particularly good at the things drivers actually cared about. And that's why people shop around. That's why competition exists. And that's why manufacturers spend billions of dollars trying to convince consumers their tire is better than the other guys. The replacement tire market is one of the largest segments in the entire automotive aftermarket. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars every year. Think about that. Tens of billions of dollars. That's one of the biggest automotive markets in America. So who benefits? Who gains influence? Who gains market share? And who gains control? Because someone always does. The official explanation is simple. California believes consumers aren't choosing efficient enough replacement tires. They argue that efficient tires will save the environment, and we need the state to help us because we're stupid. The state believes drivers should be pushed toward tires that are more closely matched with the energy-efficient characteristics of the original equipment tires. The entire argument assumes that the original tire was the right choice in the first place, and I've already explained how OEM tires are chosen. Now California wants to take that compromise and turn it into a regulatory benchmark that should concern every driver. So let's talk about what happens when the government starts narrowing your choices. This is where the conversation gets real, because every regulation sounds harmless when it's being proposed, and every regulation comes wrapped in good intentions, and every regulation promises benefits. What regulators rarely discuss are the unintended consequences. Let's say a tire company produces a tire with exceptional tread life. Drivers love it. It lasts longer than the competing brands, but it doesn't quite meet California's efficiency target. What happens? Let's say another tire delivers outstanding snow traction, perfect for drivers in harsh climates, but falls short on regulatory benchmarks built around efficiency. What happens? Let's say a budget-conscious family finds an affordable replacement tire that works perfectly for their needs. It performs well, it's safe, and it fits in their budget, but it doesn't satisfy Sacramento's latest formula. What happens? These are real-world decisions consumers make every day, and that's what bothers me about this proposal. The people writing these rules aren't standing in a tire shop trying to stretch a family budget. They aren't staring at a worn-out set of tires wondering how they're going to afford replacements. They're looking at spreadsheets. Consumers are looking at reality, and reality has a way of exposing flaws in government planning. Now let's talk about something else that isn't getting enough attention. California regulations never stay in California. I've watched this movie before. With emission standards and vehicle mandates and fuel regulations, automotive policy, it always seems to start in Sacramento. Then manufacturers adjust and suppliers adjust and other states follow because they always do. Eventually, consumers across the country feel the impact. States like New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Illinois, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, and others often align with California policies because it's easier than creating separate frameworks. The automotive industry follows the biggest market, and California knows it. And that's why dismissing this is just a California issue is a mistake. It's never just a California issue. Here's the part where people accuse me of putting on a tinfoil hat. Fine, let's talk about it. I don't think you need a conspiracy theory to see what's happening. You just need to follow the incentives. Government wants more control over outcomes. That's not new. And regulators believe they can improve markets. That's not new either. Large industries adapt to regulations and often shape them. That's not new either. The question is whether consumers end up better off. And that's where I get skeptical, because I've spent decades watching regulations sold as consumer protection end up reducing consumer choices. Not always, but most of the time, but often enough that I pay attention. And here's another question no one seems eager to answer. Why did a law that passed in 2003 suddenly become urgent in 2026? That's 23 years. 23 years later. The authority existed all along, yet suddenly the rulemaking process accelerates. Suddenly we're told this needs immediate attention. Whenever something sits quietly for 2 decades and then suddenly becomes a priority, I start asking who's pushing it to the front of the line. Maybe it's regulators, maybe it's advocacy groups, maybe it's organizations focused on energy policy, maybe it's interests most consumers have never heard of. I don't know, but somebody's pushing. Things like this don't happen on autopilot. The automotive aftermarket certainly didn't wake up one morning and ask for fewer choices. Consumers didn't demand fewer options, and independent tire retailers didn't demand fewer options. So who did? That's the question. And it's a question worth asking before the regulation becomes final, because we're pretty close. Because once regulations are finalized, changing them becomes much harder. And that's why I'm talking about this now, not after the fact, not after consumers start feeling the impact. Now. There's still time to pay attention, and there's still time to ask questions, and there is time to get involved. And here's the good news. You don't have to take my word for any of this. Like I said at the beginning, go look at the receipts. Go read the docket. The California Energy Commission's active rulemaking is docket 26-tire-01. Read it. Follow it. Watch the workshops. Review the comments. See who's participating and see who's advocating and see who's pushing, and then decide for yourself. The foundation goes back to Assembly Bill 844 from 2003. Read that too, because one thing I've learned is that informed consumers are much harder to ignore. And that's really what this comes down to. Consumer choice. It's not about tire choice, because once government starts deciding what products deserve a place in the marketplace, somebody else is making decisions that used to belong to you, the consumer. Today it's tires. Tomorrow it could be something else. And that's why the debate matters. The replacement tire market exists because drivers have different needs, different priorities, different budgets, and different expectations. California seems determined to simplify all that in a single formula. And history tells me that rarely ends the way consumers expect. So pay attention. Read the docket. Read the comments and ask questions. If you think this is a California problem, like I said in the beginning, it's not. This is going to become a U.S. problem, and it will spread to Canada, and it will spread across the world, because once you can start limiting people's choices, people get upset. And I don't blame you. This is a very serious problem. It starts with tires, and it goes to a lot of other things, not just car related. And most importantly, don't wait until those choices are gone before deciding those choices mattered, because by then, somebody else will have already made that decision for you. If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe for more videos like this, and check out our car review channel, Car Smarts. You can support me by buying me a cup of coffee, and if you want even more content, check out the links in the description. I'm Lauren Fix. Thank you so much for watching.